if you're doing the food and wine pairings, we like to know what you think about them. The way the evening will work is I'm going to explain a little bit about the wines, probably as quickly as I can with as much information as I can. And then whilst we sit back and have a glass of wine, Ben's going to take us through each of the cheeses, and then we'll have a little chat between us, talking about how we feel about the pairings and what we think. So the last thing to say is there's just two ways that you can watch this evening. One is speaker view. So if you can only see my face at the moment, you are on speaker view. The other version is gallery view, which would mean you can see Ben and I side by side. If you'd like to swap to the other view, on laptops, it's the top right, and you can click view and then change it, or the top left. And then if you're on a mobile or tablet, swipe side to side, and you'll either see the two of us or just a single head. So without further ado, I think it's time to kick off. I should mention a little bit before we get going about why we chose exhibition wines. Exhibition wines, for those of you who don't know, are they're part of our own range. We have the Society's wine, which they tend to be quite colourful labels, and then we go into the exhibition range. The exhibition is all based around our heritage, our history. It's how the Wine Society was first created in the 1800s. It was an exhibition of various things in the Royal Albert Hall. So that's why you get a little Royal Albert Hall at the top of the exhibition label wines as well. But what are exhibition wines? How are they chosen? Well, exhibition, the range is basically the buyer's card or pass to choose a wine that they think exemplifies a style. So they're a really fun wine to work with in a tasting sense, because they're sort of the creme de la creme. And we're not talking super fine wines here. We are talking decent prices. I think all of these are around the £16 mark, give or take a few pounds. But they are wines that I used to use as a tutor for level 1 and level 2 WSET, actual educational wines, because not only are they delicious, they are the best example of what they do. So for a really good cheese and wine pairing, they're really great wines to use, because you can sort of say, right, this is what a Sancerre is like with this style of cheese, because this is a really good example. So we thought it would be a bit of fun. And so I'm conscious that there were a couple of wines when we did originally put the list up that sold out at one point, came back in. So we are going to cover all the wines. That means we're going to cover 6. So hopefully you will have the wines, or if you don't, you may have heard of the regional names that we're going to mention. So you'll have a little bit of an idea. So the first wine I would like to talk about is the exhibition Sancerre. Now I'm going to also talk about the PreFoume. So if you have either of those, that's the wine we're going with first. And in terms of cheese, it's the goat's cheese. So it's the really pale one. It's Chubby Shoe, I think. Is that right, Ben? Have I got my pronunciation
Chubby Shoe.
right? Chubby Shoe.
Chubby Shoe.
And it looks, I said it to Ben earlier, it looks like a brain, which I'm sure he didn't appreciate. But if you do need to know which wine and cheese combo, it's your white wine and that particular cheese. So a little on the exhibition Sancerre. It's made for us by Domaine Serge Laloux, and it's 31-year-old vines. So they're relatively old, but we're not talking sort of low fruit concentration. They are able, because they are that age, to be machine picked, which is actually great. And I'll just show you some of the vineyards here. In the Loire, you've got these lovely sort of inclines rather than steep hillsides. And because of these rolling hills, you can machine pick. And one thing that does do is it brings the price down of the wine. There's huge debate at the moment about whether it's has a negative impact on the wine. My big feeling is no. The machines are so intelligent now, they don't damage the vine. So we probably find that because this is machine picked, it's actually taken a little bit off the price. This wine spends 3 to 6 months on the fine lees, and those are the dead yeast cells, but the really, really tiny little cells. And what that does is it adds a bit of texture to the wine. So you'll find that this is a Sancerre with a decent bit of body, which a really good Sancerre should have. The actual estate itself is not huge. It's 20-ish hectares and established by the late Serge Leloup, just southeast of the town of Sancerre in the Loire Valley, northwest France. Overlooks the Loire River, absolutely beautiful views. And his daughter and son now run the estate for him. The soils of Sancerre and PreFoume are one thing that's spoken about all the time. And I think that it's really worth mentioning them, but we are not going to go into a soil masterclass today. I did a bit of a soil deep dive on Tuesday with our Rhone Valley Southern Cru session. We're not going to go too much into soils here, but there is a particular soil that's very popular or referenced in Sancerre that I will mention, and that is Silex. And it's this sort of flinty granitic soil. It adds, a lot of people say, to the backbone and the acidity. Now, when we talk about soils, a lot of people say, oh, I can taste the soil. I can taste that sort of flint. There is a lot of debate as to what you're actually tasting. But one thing that we do know is that it does contribute to acidity for sure. And that's how the roots behave under the surface. So if you are tasting that particular wine, there's a bit more floral and sort of fresher aromas, I would say, than its neighbour, the PreFoume, that I'm going to go on to in a moment. But for me, it's got gorgeous citrus. Yeah, like I said, kind of white flowers, something grassy, something green, herbaceousness, maybe a touch of that bell pepper, green pepper sort of smell. But really, for me, it's more about the floral and the lemon. So really lovely stuff. Quickly, before we go on to the cheese, Ben, I'm going to talk about the PreFoume as well. So let me just zoom onto that one. Really quickly as well, you'll see they're quite similar price points. That's not a surprise. They are neighbours. The land is also very expensive here in PreFoume, very revered. It's a slightly smaller area than Sancerre. And this winery, this particular producer, is also slightly smaller than the last producer. It's made for us by Domaine L'Endroit Guyulot. A large mouthful. I'm definitely glad this wine is earlier on in the tasting, because if it was wine number 6, we would struggle to get that out. But it's just, it's in a village just off PreFoume, so right in the centre of where things are going on in this appellation. It's a much older producer, so 10 generations of this particular family have passed on the winemaking from mother to daughter through the generations, which I think is absolutely incredible and quite rare, actually. You'll notice this wine is older. Now, that's because this particular wine has been aged on those lees, those dead yeast cells, for even longer than the previous wine. So what does that mean, and what does that add? Well, 2008 was a really, really hot vintage. So you probably got Sauvignon that was a little bit more fuller and richer. And those lees can add, as I mentioned, that body and that complexity. It's still grown on similar soils. So we've got some chalk and some clay and some limestone. These ones are, the soils for this particular wine are especially flinty, so very similar to our Sancerre. And a lot of people say that PreFoume is slightly smokier. Now, one thing that lees also adds is not only texture, but a bit of flavour, and sometimes smokiness can do that. So if you are comparing side by side, I'm sure not many of you are, but if you ever were comparing the two, smokiness tends to be an indication of a PreFoume, and that's where that name Fume comes from, but not always. For me, it's much less on the floral side and a bit more on those sort of slightly riper lemons, a bit less tart lemon. Really complex, but it definitely smells a little older as well. White peaches maybe slightly more here too. So without further ado, I've rabbited. I'm going to enjoy the wines whilst we hear from Ben. So whichever you have, members, please do have a sip. Taste a bit of cheese as Ben's talking, have another sip, and see what you think about the combination. So over to you, Ben.
Thank you very much, Hannah. It's really strange that you talk about that smokiness, because a lot of people say that in cheese as well, but actually it's that muskiness of cheese, or it's the musky flavors. It's the old library kind of, you know, it's mold, it's, you know, and you get all those kind of those memories, don't you? Which we automatically say is smoky. So yeah, anyway, so our first cheese is Chubby Shoe. So mine's falling apart a little bit here. I don't know if you can see it, but it's the Loire goat's cheese. Our Chubby Shoe is by Georges Lay. So Paul Georges Lay is amazing at making Loire goat's cheeses. If you look at the outside of a Chubby Shoe, we have this very much brain constructor, which is geotrichum. So that is a starter culture. Oh, sorry, my laptop is going crazy. Am I still there? Yeah.
You are, yes.
Yeah, okay. So it's raw milk, it's goat's milk. It's got very much geotrichum rind. It is, as you say, made by Georges Lay. I spoke to him recently, and I don't know if many of you have had a similar thing, but on the outside, so the rind, so my rind is kind of slipping away from the paste of the cheese. And we call that frog skin, and there is a French term for it, but in English it's frog skin. And basically, Paul said that the fat has been really high in the milk recently, which means that when it comes to drainage, it's not draining as quickly. So they're looking at this is a lactic set cheese, so we're talking about 22 to 24 hours. For it to for the curds and whey to separate. We're not using any rennet in this cheese. So rennet usually makes curds and whey within 10 minutes, but a lactic set takes about 22 to 24 hours. So the drainage is a lot slower, which means that we end up having a lot more moisture within the cheese. So the rind, you may find, may be slipping a little bit, but it should still be really beautiful. And what we expect in Loire goat's cheese, as you were speaking about before, Anna, was that minerality. But high in acidity. So you definitely have citrus notes. You have lemon, but maybe lemon peel and not lemon as it is.
It's that real what grows together goes together with this combination, isn't it, Ben? For me, yeah. A lot of the way you describe the goat's cheese, you use a lot of the language here that I would also use to describe the wines. Mm-hmm. And this lovely, sort of pairing, obviously, but this lovely combination where there is acidity, there really is lemon in both. Mm-hmm. There really is this sort of, and minerality, you've used it. I get so nervous about using it. It means different things to different people, but I know exactly what you mean. It's this flinty, chalky,
it is
sort of, all of those sorts of flavors. And also sometimes I can feel it. I think I can almost feel something chalky in the skin of the cheese. And I don't know whether that's the power of association, but there's this sort of lovely little chalky feeling to it as well. So
definitely,
it's such a classic.
Yeah, and the texture of it is absolutely stunning, isn't it? It's so moussey, it's a lot more moisture content in than chalk, but you feel like it's chalk because of the minerality within the flavors. It's absolutely beautiful.
And I find, and I don't know about you, Ben, I find pairing softer goat's cheeses slightly easier than the harder ones, because sometimes those harder cheeses really do hit that almost like iron-esque minerality. They get quite what's the word I really want to use? The graphite almost gets like pencil lead, and you get really into Yes, and I find with these lighter styles of cheese, it's a little bit easier. They're a bit friendlier on the wines because they're less intense, and you get more of that that freshness coming through that complements the wine so well.
Definitely, and it's so less obvious, isn't it? That it's not like in your face flavors. It's
Absolutely.
a lot more subtle.
I mean, you already know that I'm a huge goat's cheese fan, so this was always going to be, this was this was always going to be a winner for me. But I have to say, I really, really, really love that combination.
Yeah, it's really good.
And I also think with, with the two wines, they were good for different reasons. So for me, with the Sancerre, there was that real, like you say, lemon peel, lemon fruit. The lemon came through, and I think with the PreFoume, what it actually did was it, for me, actually made the wine less fruity, but in a really pleasant way. It brought out that lees a bit more because the lemon was actually more powerful in the cheese than it was in the wine. And so, although these wines are side-by-side neighbours and often get used in the same breath and compared to each other, incredible how different it was. So, members, if you do get a chance to do that comparison side by side in the future, I do highly recommend it because it was fun how it brought out the two different sides of each of the wines. So Ben, I'm conscious on time.
Yeah.
So let's go. We did have a point about the alcohol levels. A member has asked about being surprised the PreFoume is 14.5%. I mentioned in the we've had actually a run of very warm vintages in France comparatively. This year, not so much. 2021, you'll find them slightly lower, but 14.5% is purely down to sunshine hours. Sunshine hours were so intense in 2018 that they produced a huge amount of sugar in the grape, and then those were converted into alcohol in production. So photosynthesis has a lot to answer for, and global warming even more so. But that's why you're finding 14.5% PreFoumes, which I don't think was out of balance. And I think that extended lees aging has really helped with that because it did help sort of temper what would have been quite a punchy wine. So I think it's time to move on. Members, if you didn't see my email, we're going to go on to the Rioja first with the Manchego. The reason being, and I will justify it now because we sort of toyed with both options. I think an older wine, we are going to go from fruity and fresh to older, but an older wine sometimes can be a bit more mellow. And I think in the case of both the Riojas, I've got one of them and Ben's got the other. In the case of both the Riojas this evening, there is this lovely mellowness. So I think it was important to do this particular wine first. So let's go on to that second pairing, which I'm very excited about. And I missed your goat picture. Sorry, Ben, but there they are. So we're going to talk now about, I'll mention the producer. And I'm going to mention the producer first because both wines are from the producer, and that is La Rioja Alta. So regardless of whether you've got the 2015 exhibition or my alternative 2012, they are the same producer. And I did do that on purpose because La Rioja Alta, the producer, has got a very typical style. They are very traditional winemakers. So they were 1890s, they were started as a consortium of 5 families and grown and grown and grown. They now have over 700 hectares in all 3 zones of Rioja, but also in Rias Baixas and Ribera del Duero. So a big, big company in Spain, but very much sticking to traditions. And when I say traditions, one of the key traditions in Rioja is aging in oak. And they even have their in-house cooperage. So they make their own barrels because it makes complete sense. At any given time, Alta has 75,000 barrels full of wine in their storage. So they are, barrel extraordinaires, wine aging extraordinaires. So they specialize in reservas and grand reservas. So you're not going to get this sort of modern fruit forward, punch, and I say fruit punch as in fruit punch style of wine from Rioja Alta. You're going to get what is really a classic style. So let's talk about our Rioja exhibition first. So So this wine here, the 2015, it's 100% Tempranillo. 2015 was a particularly full and rich year, so you are going to get very expressive wine. It was grown at altitude, so higher up, 500 to 600 meters. And that gives, and on those chalky soils again, chalky clay. So we're going to get some really nice acidity backing up our aging. Picked by hand and very carefully dealt with, and you often have to deal quite carefully with Tempranillo. It can go a bit sort of oxidized and fun, and so you have to be an expert in aging it and looking after it, and they are. They've given it 2 years, like I mentioned, handmade barrels. And American oak can give something that's quite typical of Rioja, which is this coconut almost aroma. And I always think that when I'm trying to blind taste a Rioja, can I smell a Bounty bar? Can I smell coconut and chocolate, but also a bit of red fruit? And this was aged for the first year in brand new oak, and that will impart flavour. And then the second year in 4-year-old oak, so they transfer it, and that will just affect the structure and soften those tannins. Then it was bottled in 2018 and has been in bottle, aging beautifully in bottle, getting a bit more development ever since. So if you can smell it, I can smell Bounty Bar. I don't know about you. It's got this beautiful sort of red and black fruits, very herbaceous, but that lovely note of chocolate, coffee, mocha, coconut that comes from that oak aging. So it's a real mixture of flavors, but underlying all of it, a beautiful, beautiful, fresh, crisp fruit flavor as well. I don't have the second wine, so Ben, you might have to have a little taste, but I will tell you about it. It was slightly more expensive for anyone who got the alternative. This is because it's aged a little longer. So the Viña Danza is aged for 3 years in barrel. They actually don't call it a reserva, but that's just because of the style of wine they're producing. They are actually adhering to Gran Reserva, i.e. longer aging, because they have 3 years in barrel and then it's been bottle aged ever since. And another slight difference is that it's 80% Tempranillo and 20% Garnacha. So there's a bit of extra Grenache here. So it seems over 6 months longer in cask than the previous wine. So in theory, Ben, are you getting some of those coffee, chocolate, mocha, those sorts of smells in yours? Because the principle is you should.
It's absolutely, it smells beautiful. I haven't tasted it at this point, but no, it smells absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for sending that.
That's quite all right. I thought one of us had to have each. So there we go. I happened to have the Sancerre at home, so I've opened one from my own collection, but one of us had to have each. So I'm glad that you have that one as well.
And you decided to pair this with Manchego, right?
I certainly did. So I'm going to hand over to you to do Manchego.
Absolutely. So Manchego, I would say most people know Manchego from La Mancha. Our Manchego is slightly different or better than your than your usual Manchego. So I think it's really great to look at the rind of our Manchego. So our rind is a natural rind on Manchego. You'll see a lot of Manchegos that have a plasticoat around the outside. What we have to look at when we look at the rind and why it's positive to be natural rind is that you taste the environment that it's been matured in. If you have a plasticoat rind, then it's anaerobically matured, but if it's got a natural rind, then it's aerobically. And so you get to taste the environment that's being grown in, matured in. So this is made by the Para family. The Para family are third generation now. They actually brought back the black La Mancha, the black Manchego U. So usually Manchego is made from white Manchego sheep, but the Para family brought back the black Manchego sheep. So Manchego sheep in general are not high yield, they're quite low yield. And so when you have low yield, you need to think about what are the benefits, and the benefits are generally higher fat and higher protein. And you want high fat and high protein because all the flavour is in the fat and the protein. But in black Manchego sheep, you get even less yield, but you get amazing flavours from it. And it's honestly, I came to Fine Cheese Co. 3.5 years ago, and I'd never tasted Manchego like this. This is semi-curado, so it's around 3 to 4 months old, and it's just stunning.
I agree.
It's got that beautiful mouthfeel. You can tell that it's so fatty. Sheep's milk cheese is the most fatty of the highest fat and the highest protein of all milk, and more so than buffalo. And people expect that buffalo milk is going to be really high in fat and protein, but sheep's milk is more so. There's so much flavour. It's crazy what's going on. You have, a little bit of tingle from the acidity, a bit of histamine. You have beautiful fattiness, butteriness to it. It's definitely buttery. I mean, sheep's milk is gorgeous to drink. It's the best, the best milk to drink at, the best times. But
for me, I love a couple of things, but it's, we did just speak about subtlety, and it's slightly, it's got subtlety, but it's not in a boring way, but it's this lovely sort. It doesn't taste, and I don't mean to diss supermarket cheeses at all, but it doesn't taste like confected or fake in any way. It's this sort of, it tastes very fresh, I think is what I mean to say. And the other thing I love is the texture.
Yeah.
It's a bit more mouth melty than a lot of Manchego I've tasted before. It's sort of, it's softer. It's less sort of, I find sometimes Manchego can be slightly grainy, and it doesn't have any of that. It's really smooth.
No, and I think that's the thing when it comes to natural rind. If you think about cheddar, is a really great example. So you look at an Artisan cheddar and you look at a mass-produced cheddar, and their textures are different because they're anaerobically, if they're mass-produced, matured. And so their texture is going to be quite grainy because you get all of those amino acid crystals throughout it. But in an aerobically matured cheese, you don't get that. You just get more flavors. You get more nuances. It's amazing.
And I have to say, we've done another What Grows Together Goes Together, but I do love this combination. And I think one of the reasons there are a few reasons I love it. One is that Manchego has that sort of nuttiness to it. And I think aged wines, that works really quite well, particularly oak aged, that kind of nutty. I would also say a white Rioja would have done the same thing. We'd have had just as much fun on a white Rioja. We do a society's white Rioja, but not an exhibition one. But if you have a white Rioja, try it with this sort of style of Manchego, because there's something beautiful about the nuttiness going together, and it brings out a bit of the more fruit in the wine, I would say. But the main thing does come back to that texture point. It's soft, it's silky, it's melt in the mouth. And aged Riojas are the same. And the reason is that the tannins in the red ones have polymerized. So the chains of the sort of, I'm going to explain this really badly and less scientifically, but where you find grainy tannins that are lots of little grains, age, and particularly oak aging, will encourage those tannins to join together. The science words are not coming out. But what happens is when they polymerize, they join into longer strands, and those strands feel smoother in your mouth. So this sort of smooth style of cheese for me works beautifully with this, the texture of this style of wine, this aged wine. So yeah, I like that very much, Ben. Oh, lovely. Members, do let us know if you've got the same. We've got loving the La Rioja and Manchego, beautiful. Good, I'm glad. That for me is a sort of Sunday afternoon combination as well. So might have to remember as well.
It's raw milk. I don't think I mentioned that, but You just get so much more flavors through on raw milk than you do on pasteurized or thermized milk. It's you're tasting everything that they're grazing on. It's gorgeous.
It's really lovely. Thank you, Ben. That's the first time I've tried that cheese as well, so I'm delighted because I've got a new favourite. So we're going to now go on to our Langhe Nebbiolo wine. Now, I am glad, having just retasted that pairing, I am glad we've done it this way round, because the Langhe Nebbiolo is a wonderful wine. It's brand new to us. So we're doing the Langhe, and Ben, you're going to have to pronounce the cheese for me.
QUADRELLO.
QUADRELLO. I nearly did it earlier, and then you repeated it for me.
Well, you'd have said QUADRELLO.
I would have said QUADRELLO, sure. But we're going to pair it with the Langhe Nebbiolo. Again, we've got a little bit of a more loose what grows together goes together on this one. But this Nebbiolo is, I wouldn't say punchier, that's the wrong word, but it is full-bodied, and it is, I would say, probably a bit more acidic and a bit buffer. So I think we've definitely done it in the right order. Like I said, a new wine to us, Sarah Knowles MW, who's just started producing this with Rizzi, and in particular the winemaker there, Enrico Della Piano. And it's made from 100% Nebbiolo. And for those of you who like Barolo or Barbaresco, this is actually from the Barolo vine. Sorry, the opposite. This is from their Barbaresco vines, but they're younger vines and they're not using them yet to produce a Barbaresco. So they're calling it a Langhe Nebbiolo. Langhe is the region that Barolo and Barbaresco are from. To compare what's the difference, what's Barbaresco and what's Barolo. Barbaresco tends to be a little lighter and slightly more perfumed than Barolo, but the great thing is that they are far more approachable when young. So Barolo vines in that particular subzone in Barolo tend to need a bit more aging, both in barrel and bottle, but they just need to have that softening we spoke about. Whereas the Barbaresco vines don't need as much aging. So this has had 12 months in large oak, 50 hectolitres. And I'm just going to quickly show you a nice picture of where we're talking about here. If you would like to go to on a trip to visit wineries around the world, I'm pretty sure the Langhe region would be up there on my hit list of immediate things to do as soon as I can. So that's the area we're talking about. Those are the lovely Rizzi vines. They're hand-picked, and then, as I've just mentioned, they do spend 12 months in large oak barrels, not the small oak that we're going to talk about in a moment with our port, but large oak. So we're not getting much flavour influence, as we did with the Rioja and as we will with the Tawny. We're not getting, we won't get flavour with the Tawny, but the Rioja, we got our coconut bounty bars. Here, we're not getting oak flavours. We're really getting the softening of those tannins. So for me, what we're getting instead in terms of flavour are things like licorice, raspberry, red fruits, definitely. It's almost perfumed red fruits. So I'd hate to say potpourri because often people think of that as a negative thing. But for me, it's a really positive thing in this wine. It's really aromatic and a tiny touch of something spicy for me. And I'm trying to put my finger on it and I can't. So members, if you've got the spice that this is, maybe clove. Yeah, maybe clove. But if you're getting other spices, please jot them down because it might twig me, but I'm definitely getting something spicy. Yeah. Oh, for me, this smells like it should be a lighter wine than it is. When you go in to taste it, you're going to find it's full of structure. Now, that does mean it's beautifully ageable, but it also means that it needs food. So it needs all of the things that cheese provides. And I'm going to let Ben go on to this cheese a bit more, and then we'll talk about why it goes with the food. Yeah, Beth's put allspice. I think you're right, Beth. Clove and allspice. Almost Chinese spicy, but I think clove and allspice are definitely the smells I'm getting there. So thank you for that. And a bit of pepper. Yeah, touch of pepper as well. So Ben, I'm going to hand over to you to talk about the cheese, and then I'll talk about what it is in the cheese that makes the wine hopefully taste better. So members, try the wine first if you haven't already, then try a bit of cheese and go back to the wine, and hopefully, if the experiment works, you should have softened out that wine slightly. So over to you, Ben.
Yeah, I just tried those together. It's so good. Really, really good together. So this is QUADRELLO. So QUADRELLO is made just outside of Bergamo by the Gritti family. So they're third generation dairy farmers, but they're only first generation. So Bruno started making buffalo milk. He's the first generation of buffalo cheese making. Before that, they did cow's cheese making. So they're up in the mountains, and so buffaloes in the mountains is a little bit of a strange being, but they're making this gorgeous buffalo milk wash rind semi-soft cheese, which is absolutely beautiful with this wine. So a wash rind cheese, basically, they form a bloomy rind. So if we think about a semi-soft, or a soft cheese with bloomy rind, being Brie de Meaux, which is a really good example. But then they wash it. So they wash it with brine, so a brine solution, which brings out Brevibacterium. And Brevibacterium is a much more savoury flavour than you have a bitter flavour on something like a Candidum rind, a bloomy rind. So they started doing buffalo milk just on a whim. They just wanted to give it a go and see what happened. And they ended up selling all of their cows and buying more buffalo to make beautiful buffalo cheese, which is really high in fat and really high in protein, as we was discussing before about sheep's milk. But you definitely taste it in this. You have it's the mouthfeel of buffalo milk, I think. It's much more cloying as a mouthfeel, rather than sheep's milk. It feels like that buffalo milk is thicker, whereas sheep's milk definitely dilutes slightly. And yeah, I just think I have to say on that, it's absolutely gorgeous with this Nebbiolo. Absolutely beautiful.
It's funny, Ben, because we've had I've got a picture of the cows. It's funny because we've had one member say that they find the cheese is nice, the wine is nice, but don't love them together, and they say reminiscent of burnt rubber. And then another member, James, has said this is my favorite combo so far, and I think this might end up being one that polarizes people. For me, in terms of the combination, and it is all obviously personal preference, so I'm not dictating what you should taste here. This is definitely what I get. But the way it works for me is that the wine is has very firm tannins, and the protein in the cheese calms those tannins down. So what tends to happen is when the proteins coat the mouth, they sort of help with the tannins. Again, not using too much science speak tonight. That's not what science is. That's not what tonight's for. But protein foods tend to calm down tannins. So your prime example would be a steak and Malbec. We've spoken about that before. But the high proteins here do help. But also it's saltier. And I don't know, Ben, I'm going to ask the question, but I've already done it anyway because I love it. Do you eat the rind?
Of course, it's a wash rind.
Good.
If I could eat the rind of any cheese, the only rind that I wouldn't eat would be a plastic rind or a wax rind. But then I probably wouldn't eat anyway.
Well, it reminds me. So when I used to work at West London Wine School, we used to do Tellagio with Nebbiolo wines.
This is Tellagio buffalo milk.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very reminiscent of a Tellagio. I actually find the texture more attractive than a Tellagio. Actually, the texture works better with the wines. But the saltiness on the rind, and a member's asked what's the rind washed with? You said a brine, right? A saltwater solution.
Yeah.
And I think traditionally you would have used saltwater, right? I know a lot of Tellagio says that it's still saltwater washed, and it's not. But but that saltiness for me brings out the fruit flavors in the Nebbiolo. And one thing that it kind of does is almost fast forward. Okay, it's not going to get fruitier with age, but it's certainly going to mellow a bit of that structure. So for me, the cheese makes the wine more approachable. And I think this is the first pairing for me that the wine has, some of them have been nice marriages, but for me, this wine really gets a piggyback on the food. And that's not a surprise. Italians make wine that are designed to be drunk with food. They do not drink sipping, quaffing wines. They think we're all mad. You know, even if you go to a wine bar in Italy, you are immediately served salty snacks. And that's exactly what this does here. It's really improved the wine for me. And again, personal preference. So other people are not finding the same. But the other thing is that you've mentioned already as well, the acidity. You know, Nebbiolo is a high acid grape variety, and this is a high acid wine. And if you had a flabby fat cheese that didn't have any natural acidity in, you'd really notice. So kind of having the punch of the acidity, the salt, the naturally occurring proteins does everything to bring the wine into a friendlier space for me. So yeah, I personally really enjoy it, but I do recognize that it's quite a polarizing situation.
I think as well we have to look at the rind. The rind is so thin, and I think the rind being so thin and it being natural rind, you know, for them to do that, it's so skilled. It's ridiculous. They're obviously amazing cheesemakers. You know, to be able to have 3-month-old cheese with tiny rind on them, even though they've been wash rind, and not a great deal of breakdown either. I think it's if you eat the rind on its own as well.
There are some members who've said this is the best rind I've ever had.
It's gorgeous.
So and Sandra said my dogs would have issues with this. The rinds belong to them. Yes, Sandra, that happens in our house too. And believe me, it would not be going to the dogs, this rind. The cheese becomes a whole different thing when you have the rind. So I'm glad.
It's like chicken skin. It's gorgeous.
And somebody mentioned that the cheese just without the rind didn't work quite as well. I actually tried that earlier when I was getting ready for this session, and I did exactly that. I thought, if I get in trouble about eating too much rind, what will I say if we do the middle bit? And I thought, it's not quite the same. It doesn't do the same thing. You don't get that sort of sharp, spicy, salty thing going on. So,
and that's why they wash it.
Exactly.
It's much better. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you, Ben. I'm glad. Yeah, I like a polarizer, so I'm fine that some people didn't enjoy that. So long as you like something this evening, and as long as you like the wine and the cheese by itself, then hey. But for me, yeah, it's a bit of a wild combination, but a good one. So on to our final pairing, and we've already seen that there are some questions coming in. So I will answer those as and when. But at the moment, I think if we go on to our final pairing, especially if people are on their way to have some supper after this, I'm not sure I need any, but yeah. So the final wine to talk about this evening is our exhibition 10-year-old Tawny Port. And I have used this wine before in a tasting. I've also got it coming up for something in the next couple of weeks, but I don't really mind because I think it's really important for a few reasons. But one is that Tawny Port is such an underrated style of port. You know, people think that you need to have vintage ports and this and that, and Tawny Port is gorgeous. This is only £17.50. It won a silver award at Decanter, and it's Joe has put here 6 to 7 dessert sweetness, and I think that's really actually worth mentioning. That this is, you know, ports are sweet wines generally, and there are dry ports, white ports, for example, but it's a sweet wine. But it's not a sweet wine in the sense of a sauterne or something like that. So it's made completely differently. Some of you will have spotted the alcohol level, for example. So I will tell you a little about how Tawny Port's made, and then in particular this wine. So Port itself is a fortified wine, so that's the style of port. And fortified means that whilst they're producing a red wine or a white wine, depending on red or white port, or rosé port as it now exists, as they're producing that wine, as the fermentation has happened or is happening rather, they add an alcohol spirit. A grape spirit, which is really high alcohol. And what that does is it stops the yeast cells in its tracks, and it stops them fermenting any more of the natural sugar in the grape juice into wine. So you end up with a wine that has high alcohol because you've added this spirit to it, but it also has high sugars because those sugars couldn't be converted into the normal alcohols. So all the other wines we've tried today, other than the port, basically had sugar that got converted into alcohol, and we didn't leave any sugar left over, or a very, very small amount that the human palate can't really detect. What we've done with the Tawny Port is we've stopped the fermentation, we've left some sugar in there, but we've bolstered the alcohol with that spirit. And what you end up with is this sort of perfect balance between sugary and boozy. And that's why people love port so much. But I'm really keen to get fortified wines out of the history books. They are on the decline, and I think so unfairly, because actually in terms of easy drinking, they're a really, really easy drinking style of wine. Brits tend to say, oh, I want a dry wine, and that's actually not a British palate. Brits do actually like sweet things. So if you do give people a Tawny Port, particularly Tawny being a slightly lighter style, 9 times out of 10, they absolutely love it. In answer to a question we've had about should it be chilled, you can serve it chilled. I was a little dubious about serving it chilled tonight, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But to give you an idea of places you could drink this wine, or situations you could drink this wine, you could have a chilled Tawny Port on a summer's afternoon with a delicious sort of, I don't know, not strawberries and cream, but a strawberry tart or something. I had a very sunny afternoon spent drinking Tawny Port chilled with pastel de natas in Porto, in the blazing sunshine, in a t-shirt, and it works in the summer right through to winter. You can drink this all year round. And I know that we're getting into sort of a cozy time. I'm in a jumper, we're having it with Stilton, and it's a very classic combination, but I do really want to push the fact that Tawny Port can be drunk all year round. And the only reason I didn't chill it is I would suggest drinking it chilled is because, quite frankly, it's been very, very cold today. And there is something nice and warming about a Tawny Port when you're drinking it at room temperature. So Tawny traditionally is one of the lighter styles. It's a young-ish wine. You can have sort of 10-year-old, 20-year-old, 30-year-old Tawny Ports, but they take an average of the age of the blend. So it's lots of different vintages blended together rather than a vintage port, which would just have 1 year on it. It is matured in casks, so it's matured in those barrels. They tend to be old barrels, so you're not getting too much flavour, and small ones. And like I said, there'll be an average age of casks that they blend together. You get a subtle oak sweetness rather than it being too much. This particular port is made by the Flaggate Group. So the Flaggate Group own Taylor's, Fonseca. You probably recognise Taylor's. It's the bigger one when you even supermarket shopping, but we sell some really decent Taylor's ports. They are a huge company, very impressive. They are the only British port shipper that's actually lasted as one family without selling bits off, etc. They have created styles of wine. They created late bottled vintage port. I believe they're the first people just coming out in the news to create white port and tonic in a can. Very pioneering. And we use them for our 10-year-old exhibition Tawny. So how's it made? Well, I've mentioned some of the things, but this one in particular as well is picked by hand. They all have to be, and I will show you actually why, because I've got a picture. It's not actually too alarming, but the port, it looks quite sort of gorgeous and natural there. It's very steep up in the Douro. So everything's picked by hand. And then port is one of the only wines that is still sometimes foot trodden. And they do a bit of foot treading on this. So it's quite a romantic wine as well. And I think for the what you're getting in the glass, you know, the work that's gone into this, the aging in barrel, you know, it's 10 years old. Average age of some of this wine could be 20 years old in this glass. You've got old vintage, lots and lots of hands-on production, and a wine that also, you know, you don't need to drink a huge amount of. We've got a 75 cl bottle, but you wouldn't drink it like a normal wine because of the high alcohol. Value for money in port is mad. So I'm going to enjoy my glass whilst I've waxed lyrical, and I'm going to hand over to Ben, because I think probably of all the combinations, this is the most classic, right, Ben?
Yeah, I think so. And someone just said on the chat, actually, Christmas has arrived. I completely agree, because this is what you have at Christmas, and this is the tradition is Porton Stilton. So this is Billy Kevin on the left-hand side. He has revolutionised COLSTON BASSETT dairy in Nottinghamshire. So Stilton had to be made in Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire or Leicestershire for it to be called Stilton. There are two main Stilton producers, two of the best Stilton producers, is COLSTON Bishop and COLSTON BASSETT. They're very, very different in flavour profile. I would say in COLSTON Bishop, which we sell but we don't sell as much of, is much more obvious. I would say peppery Stilton, much more, much bigger in flavour. However, COLSTON BASSETT is a lot more subtle. It's a cooling blue rather than a peppery blue. It doesn't, you know, there's no spice to it. It's subtle. So it's pasteurized, and then this is vegetarian rennet. And also eat the rind. So as you're eating it with the port, please eat the rind. The rind is absolutely gorgeous. It's really yeasty. Yeah, beautifully savoury. But yeah, it's one of the best, or the best in our opinion. Stilton's going, and Billy Kevin's been running it for about 25 years now, and now you can't buy enough of it. He has to allocate these, you know, his cheeses every year to the people that have been buying his cheese from him historically. It's absolutely gorgeous. I think the milk, so the paste, if we look at the paste around the blue, the milk is absolutely beautiful, especially with pasteurized cheese. You're getting a lot of flavor through, and then you feel like there's big pockets of blue, but actually they're not crazy. They don't do loads to your palate. It just complements the rind and the paste at the same time. Yeah, it's COLSTON BASSETT Stilton is the best Stilton going. It's absolutely gorgeous.
It's been getting some very good reviews on the chat, and I have to just mention one member who said that the rind is almost marmitey, and I agree. It's like yeasty, savoury, umami, that fifth flavour, that sort of sour, salty umami. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And I think people, you know, they may not eat the rind usually, but actually it's so gorgeous. It's so beautiful. And Billy looks, you know, he grades every single one of his batches of his cheese, and he looks at the rind and he wants them a lovely orangey color. This is, you know, it's like it. If you look at it in the light, it is slightly oranging, and then we have, you know, a little bit of mold growth over the top. Yeah, it's so beautiful.
It is absolutely gorgeous. And some people have said, sort of, you know, explains why the classics are classics. And to give you a sort of overview about why this is a classic pairing, you know, what is it that's going on here that makes it work? Well, there are a few things at play, but the funnest bit for me is, quite frankly, that their opposites attract. And all of those salty, savoury, and I think that's why I went for Tawny Port in particular as well. Tawny Port is the freshest style of port, you know, particularly a 10-year-old when it's on the younger spectrum, apart from a Ruby, which can be fresher, but it's very much a fresh style of port that we've got in our glass here if you're drinking along with me. And for me, that real opposites attract, you know, the sweetness and the savory, that umami with the light freshness. Port's not necessarily the most high acid wine to pair with Stilton. So you could have a Sauterne that would be higher in acid naturally. But the sort of freshness of fruit, I think that's really where I'm going. The freshness of fruit really, really counteracts the savory flavors. And quite frankly, the higher alcohol. You know, when you've got the blue, I think there's something really nice about the punchiness of the blue and the punchiness, but not overpowering alcohol. And they make a really, really nice marriage.
I feel like the port brings it down a little bit. Like
yeah, it does, doesn't it?
And just makes everything, you know, calm and, you know.
And I'm always a massive fan of the sweet and salty. If I go to the cinema, I'm one of those people that gets salt and sweet popcorn in together. I don't love salted caramel, but that's about the caramel thing. But sweet and salt for me is a gorgeous, you know, pork with apple sauce with a really salty crackling. That's my idea of a brilliant food pairing where you have all flavors at play. And this kind of does all of that in just this really, I say simple. It's simple because it arrives to us, Ben, in a bottle and a glass and in a package from the Fine Cheese Company. And we say it's simple, but the time and effort that goes into making these two products is so vast and huge. But
I mean, to get to COLSTON BASSETT as it is now, it took him 20 years. Let's say, you know, the last 5-10 years is as beautiful as it is now, but that took him 20 years.
Amazing.
I know. I think it's yeah.
Well, I think for me, it'd be really hard to choose a particular pairing of the evening. We'll do that in just a second because I have got a few questions. I'm going to answer quickly one about the port that I did see come through. Because somebody asked, I think I've lost it now, but about what's service temperature and how to store it. So service temperature, like I said, you can actually serve this port chilled out of the fridge. I would recommend now that you've opened it, put it back in the fridge with the top in. It is a wine still. It's not a Madeira or something that's been oxidized and had a lot of treatments. Not a great word, but had a lot of processes happen to it where it won't spoil. It will last slightly longer than a normal wine because the sugar acts as a little bit of a preservative, but actually really do treat it like a wine. I wouldn't leave a port, if you wanted it at its best, open for longer than 2 weeks. So I certainly probably wouldn't leave a wine longer than a week, but a port 2 weeks I'd give it. But really, if you wanted it at its best, you do kind of want to drink it sooner rather than later. So that would be my answer to that. Second question was about the Stilton, because it was, can Stilton be included too? Now, Ben, I think the last event we did, well, not the last event, but it would have been about a year ago to the day.
Really? I didn't really think so yet. No.
We've been doing these for over a year now.
No, we haven't.
We have.
Wow.
But we did Stilton and Tawny Port once. So yes, in answer to that question, most definitely.
Stilton's so gorgeous. Yeah, that changes all the time as it's raw milk rather than pasteurized. So it rapidly changes. Every make is different. So yeah, I would definitely recommend port with Stilton. But also Joe Schneider, who makes it, he recommends a cider to go with
Stilton.
Yeah,
I can't say it properly. I'm sorry, Ben. My cheese pronunciation is horrendous. Somebody said that port in their house lasts 20 minutes, so that's fair enough. Port is a great wine that you can share amongst friends, because often they'll say they don't want a glass, or they say they're not sure. Some will say definitely, but I guarantee if you pour somebody a glass of port, they will not only have one. It's definitely a wine where you have two. So now I have got a couple of other questions. Another observation we've had that's come in through the Q&A is that the fantastic Stilton went well with Muscat de Beaune de Venise. I think the nice thing about Stilton is there are a lot of sweet wines that compare really well with Stilton, aren't there?
Yeah, I completely agree. It is the sweetness. That's definitely what you want. That's definitely what we're looking for.
We did have a question on that Beth asked, and we'll do a couple of questions and then we'll ask what people's favourites were. But I'm conscious I advertised it to run till 15:15 because Ben and I love to chat and we always run over. But we will try not to go too much into it. But Beth has asked on a good dry wine pairing for Roquefort. Now, Ben, how would you describe the difference between Roquefort and Stilton? Let's start with that, and then we'll work backwards with the wine.
So much higher in salt, much higher in acidity. So a lot of moisture within Roquefort. I would say Stilton has a lot more flavor. It's British. So if you think about British flavors, think about like a high moisture content in French taste. So and it's a lot more salty.
So I think for that reason, I will just have a quick disclaimer as well. I was tasting along with 5 French gentlemen and Marcel Orford Williams, our Rhone buyer, in Rasto a few weeks ago. And the cheese ball came out and it was lovely. And the wife of the winemaker was sat next to me and she said, my favourite cheese in the world is Stilton. And she doesn't want to eat Roquefort. She says that when they can buy Stilton in France, all of the winemakers choose Stilton over Roquefort. So I thought that was fascinating. I've heard it sort of colloquially that Stilton is this massive craze in winemaker world, but to have her say, I won't eat Roquefort, I only eat Stilton.
I think what we have to remember is, as well, I'm sure you have in the wine world, is that we have Stilton, but we have six or seven maybe now Stilton makers, but actually you don't want to eat all 7. You want to eat a certain Stilton maker cheese. And the same with Roquefort. You don't want to eat every single Roquefort maker's cheese because actually there are lots of differences between each maker, and you have the same, maybe even bigger in the wine world.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Stylistically. Exactly. But I would say, to answer the question about Roquefort, because it's punchier, because it's really intense, I find Roquefort is really a sweet wine only territory. Stilton and Stichelton, did I say it right that time, Beth? Good. Less so. You can pair sort of richer red wines there. I tend to go, when I'm pairing red wines, and I say red wines, you can pair white as well, but when I'm pairing red wines, I would tend to go for things that are slightly mustier, older, earthier. If you've got any of your Rioja left, try it. I think that's interesting. I think for me, you want a bit of age, but you do still want some fruit. So you don't want it so old that it tastes like cardboard or sort of vegetal. You do still need some fruit. But what you would find is that the blue cheese tends to bring out the fruitier flavors in your wine. If you really feel like being experimental, white wines that are oxidized can be really quite fun. So there's particularly a white Rioja that is oxidized, but very, very hard to get hold of. So if you're looking instead that something, so someone's just tried the Stilton and Rioja, very nice, good. If you are looking for white oxidized wines or slightly oxidative, more sherried style white wines, the Jura is a good place to look. And sometimes those combinations can be quite interesting. So there are dry wines, but I would, Roquefort is it's just turned on the gas, hasn't it? It's like Gear 5 Stilton. So I think it's worth mentioning that sometimes that Gear 5 can't be matched by a dry wine.
Also, Roquefort is sheep's milk, and Stilton is cow's milk. So again, you have a lot more fat, protein within the milk.
The volume has been pumped up, I guess. Yeah. And again, probably why French winemakers are less inclined to drink their red wines with Roquefort and prefer the Stilton, because you probably allow the wines to sing a little bit more.
Roquefort is gorgeous, but just be careful. Don't pay over the odds for Roquefort unless you know where it's come from, because a lot of it's one of those ones where people may advertise it as being Roquefort, but you may not get what you're looking for. Carl Roquefort, so Carl's, as we say in England. Carl Roquefort is, it's gorgeous. They're fourth generation. Yeah.
Good stuff. Thank you, Ben. Now we've got a question that I was actually going to answer at the beginning, but I'm glad that it's come through. With the exhibition wines, why do winemakers agree to make the Wine Society label rather than having recognition for their name for these great wines? Love the wines, but the fact we get great benchmark styles, but wondering why they agree to it and the assumption that it won't be as good as wine under their name. Really good question, Sandra. The negotiation, should I say, with each producer is different. Now, a lot of producers, and I would say almost all producers, see an exhibition wine as a bit of a badge of honor. So there is that. So a lot of the producers we work with will make a wine exclusively for us because they want to. And they want to get our members. If you think, if you were in the showroom or if you're on the website and you see our own label Sancerre, you're probably quite likely to go with it because you know it's going to be good. And then afterwards, you might see, Domaine Serge Laloux's name on the label, and then you might explore their wines afterwards. So for a lot of producers, it could be an entry into a market that perhaps they haven't got before. But what I would say is that each winemaker is completely different on this negotiation. Some winemakers, we take parcels of land that they weren't going to use for a blend. So they might have changed their blending structure, and Joe Locke could be walking around in South Africa and say, amazing, I love that parcel or that barrel. What are you going to do with it? And, the winemaker might say, I'm not sure. And she says, let's snap it up. Can we have it? So that might be what happens. Or, and this is really quite rare, but it does happen. We've got one particular producer for one of our Bordeaux wines at the moment, one of our left bank wines, who won't disclose that they're the producer. I don't even know who the producer is. I've got my ideas, but I don't even know. And we've actually taken wine that is not quite good enough to go into their absolute premier label. They've said it's not quite there, but it's still really good. We don't want to chuck it away. And so we sell it. Now, I do know that we sell it for a fraction of the price. Yes, Ian said seconds. Cast-offs is another word we quite like to use. It's the opposite of sloppy seconds sometimes. It's sort of best seconds ever. And that happens rarely, but it does happen. So exhibition can be a combination of things. It could be that we've worked with them for a long time and they want to do it for us. It could be that we found something really special and we ask them, or it could be all sorts of things. But it's definitely not, let's put it under a mystery label. We're really clear. Their name is on the front of the label. They're mentioned on the back label. They're mentioned in our wine notes. So if they allow us to say who they are, we very much promote them. And I can only think of one producer that we work with where we only sell an exhibition label. All the other producers that we have under the exhibition, we sell multiple of their wines. So there we go. I'll just have a quick check. One quick question for you, Ben, and then I think we might be done. I say done. I'm just desperate to go and have some more of my cheeses because my plate's looking dry. Nadia has asked, what are the best biscuits for cheese, Ben, so that they don't compete? And how do you feel about extras such as dates, apples, grapes, etc.?
Yeah, so plain, I would say as plain as possible. It's on your palate, isn't it? So if you like something really fragrant, then buy something really fragrant. But generally, to go with cheese, so something pretty neutral, charcoal, Bath ovals, Bath squares, oat cakes, like they go really well. And then when you think about flavors, we put in accompaniments, so something that's, quite high in acidity, quite lactic, we want something like cherry or something that is really high in, I don't know, these berry fruits. Then we think about sheep's milk high in fat. We want something like quince. Membrillo goes beautifully with sheep's milk cheese. And then we look at blue cheese, or even like Montgomery's cheddar or Westcombe or something like that. Really fruity. And we can complement that with like a fruit chutney. And that's where I go with like your proper British fruit chutney kind of thing. And I've seen on the right hand side. Sorry, Emma, but there is a Stitchelton and Stilton thing. And I just quite like to clarify Stitchelton and Stilton, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it. Please do.
So Stilton is now called Stilton, but it's only been called Stilton since 1989. Before that, basically it was a raw milk cheese. In 1989, there was a food poisoning outbreak, and basically after that, so they blamed it on Stilton. And they basically they weren't allowed to call raw milk Stilton Stilton after 1989. So basically, COLSTON, BASSETT, Crockall, Bishop called their cheese Stilton. Now, Joe Schneider makes exactly the same recipe, but he makes it with raw milk, and he calls it Stitchelton, because basically Stilton was the trading ground for cheese, like an M1 down the centre of the country.
The cheese M1.
Yeah, and that's where it was all traded originally, and it was a place called actually Stitchelton originally, and then turned to Stilton. And so the original recipe of Stilton was Stitchelton.
Ah, so Stitchelton, even though we see it as a newer invention, if you want to call it that, is actually more the original recipe.
It's the original recipe, yeah. And I love it to make, but there's both amazing as they are. Yeah.
What a wonderful fact, Ben. Thank you. Great stuff. So I'm conscious of time. If any members do have any more questions, then please do let us know. In answer to the main, well, it's not really a question, but a statement. I had some members asking about doing more of these around Christmas. You're in luck. So Ben and I kind of pitched this evening as a really good gearing up to winter. We picked some wines that were friendlier when the colder nights set in. However, we are doing a cracking Christmas cheese board, aren't we, Ben, on the 9th of December?
We're basically doing my ideal cheese board for Christmas. And you've just said the wine. I
gave Ben free rein and I said, right, we did it this way around. I chose some wines that I wanted to do, and Ben gave me his cheese suggestions, and we had a bit of back and forward. This time I said to Ben, right, what's your perfect Christmas cheese board? And he went for it. So we're going to do that in the first week, or sorry, it ends up being the second week of December. However, obviously, we'd encourage you to order your wines and cheeses for Christmas in advance. However, it will be a good session, whether you want to do it with family, friends, get people over. It's really nice, Christmassy, festive feel to it. We're going to pick some lovely Christmassy wines as well. So please do register for that. In my follow-up email tomorrow, I will include the link to this video on YouTube. I will include some previous sessions Ben and I have done, and the link to sign up to the Christmas one, because should we wear party hats, Ben? Maybe.
Whatever you say.
It will hopefully have a lovely festive feeling to it. But yeah, we're basically going to do Ben's ideal Christmas cheese board, and I'm going to bring the wines and hopefully have a lovely evening.
We will.
So we hope to see you then. For everyone who's off to go and eat another plate full of cheese, I hope you enjoy. I'm going to go and probably go for the Stilton and the Port, because now once I'm hooked, I can't stop. But thank you, Gil, behind the scenes this evening. Thank you as well, Ben, for joining me. As always, an absolute pleasure, and I love hearing your nuggets of wisdom about cheese. So thank you again.
Thank you very much.
And you are welcome. And members, will see you hopefully in December. Cheers.